Now that you have started to settle in, you begin to think about employment and working in Canada. You have been in contact with the city's settlement agency, who has been providing immense support and guidance for you and your family during this journey. You are grateful to have an appointment scheduled with the employment counselor this morning. As you're anxiously awaiting the counselor with documents in your hand, you're hoping to be able to get a job that is similar to, if not the same, as the one you had back in your home country.
Hi, good morning. My name is Julia from Our Town Welcoming Services, and I will be your employment counselor. How are you doing today?
I'm okay, still a bit unsettled, but so happy to be here. How are you?
I'm well, thanks for asking. Today we're going to review your educational and employment assessment to determine if your credentials and experiences are valid here in Canada. This will help us figure out the different options you have for working here. Do you have any questions before you begin?
No, I just hope that we will be able to work so we can get our own place to live.
We'll do our best to help you out. So I have my checklist here to make sure we go through everything thoroughly. We'll just be reviewing your credentials to see if they meet Canadian standards and determine if there are additional exams you need to take. Do you have the document you were given at immigration check?
Yes, here are the papers.
Great. There are a total of 5 organizations that can provide educational credential assessments in Canada. One of them is the World Education Services. So today we're going to begin the application process with them online. It will take 35 business days for them to process and about $220 plus tax. Is that okay?
Okay, I think.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Good. Nervous to find out if I can work here.
Don't worry, we'll go through your Canadian equivalency summary and discuss your options. All right, let's see. Well, it looks like they rejected your credentials as they were evaluated as not equivalent to Canadian education standards. I'm sorry to inform you that based on this report, your academic credentials are not recognized here in Canada.
None of this will count here?
Unfortunately, yes. It means that in Canada, the education and professional licenses that you had back in your home country are not up to Canadian standards.
No, but I need a job. I came here to support my family. Why did we even move here? I won't be able to find a job.
I'm so sorry for the news, but we are here to support you. Although your credentials are not recognized, you can still find other pathways. For example, you can reapply for school and complete the training, or maybe you can work in a different field.
What do you mean? It took me many years to get to where I am in my career. See? Look, I have all these documents for you. I have proof.
Welcome, everyone, this evening to our panel, A Bitter Pill, Utilizing the Talents of Refugee Women Doctors. My name's Tess Acton, and I'm a refugee lawyer in British Columbia, and I'll be moderating our panel this evening. So to start, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that this event has been organized from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of many Indigenous peoples. For me this evening, I'm on the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Lekwungen and WSÁNEĆ nations. So as we gather from different places, I invite you to reflect on being a guest on these lands. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the funders for MAP, the funder for MAP, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. And I'd also like to thank our event partners tonight. There's a few: the Alliance for Doctors Denied by Degree, Inasmuch Community Society, the Institute for Canadian Citizenship and Stand Together campaign, Mosaic BC, Mount Pleasant Neighborhood House, Options Community Services, and Heart Team at Western University. Tonight, we'll deep dive into the predicament faced by many doctors who come from other countries and the challenge that they face in continuing their work here. During the pandemic, when we need skilled doctors more than ever, it seems ironic that some people have to sit it out. They're not permitted to share their skills to help fight this virus and contribute their skills to the medical profession in Canada. For international medical graduates, as the sort of acronym, the short form IMGs, you'll probably hear tonight, unfair and discriminatory practices abound. Despite their proving their qualifications according to Canadian requirements, a large majority of IMGs are never licensed as physicians in Canada. Each year, between 1,400 and 1,900 international medical graduates don't get entry-level jobs as resident physicians because there aren't equal positions available to them. This growing number emphasizes how so many IMGs have given up becoming licensed because of systemic barriers that become insurmountable. That's what the campaign brought by the Alliance for Doctors Denied by Degree is working on here in BC, as well as a human rights complaint. So tonight we'll hear more about the personal experiences of two women who have been through this process, about the human rights complaint in BC, as well as how the Canadian health services could be so much better for the inclusion of international medical graduates. We would benefit from their languages, their cultural knowledge, and all the skills that they have to offer. So throughout the evening tonight, we're going to be trying to engage with our audience as much as we can in this virtual setting. So you're welcome to put some questions in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll also have some polls that you can answer and participate in. So I think the first one should be coming up on your screen shortly. Yes, there it is for me at least. And so the first question is, do you have your own family doctor? You can answer yes or no. If you click a choice and then submit, we'll all be able to see everyone's experiences with that. So I'll give everyone a moment to do that. And the results should come up for everyone to see. So around 3/4 of people are saying yes, and 1/4 of people are saying no. I know I haven't been able to find my own physician previously when I lived in Ontario or since I've moved to British Columbia. And so, I mean, it really makes me think about how many more people would have access to this kind of care if around 1,500 IMGs per year were permitted to practice. So thanks everyone for sharing. Since our event tonight takes place so close to International Women's Day, we've intentionally brought together a panel of women speakers, and tonight we'll be providing them with an opportunity for them to raise their voices. We have 4 amazing women who will be speaking tonight, and I'll give more fulsome introductions just ahead of when they will be speaking. But we'll hear from Damilola, Zarghuna, Rosemary, and Maureen. First, we'll hear presentations from each of them, and then afterwards there'll be a panel discussion, and you're able to put questions in, like I mentioned before, in the Q&A feature in the webinar, and there'll be a few more polls. So we opened the program this evening with a short video, and our first speaker was involved in helping to create that video. And that's Damilola Toki. She's an internationally trained physician and a PhD candidate in the Health Professional Education Program in Health and Rehabilitation Services at Western University. She brings a wealth of experience in comparative healthcare systems and models of interprofessional collaboration, practice, and health professional education. Her work is housed within the space that connects research with policy, practice, and education to inform solutions to problems undermining equity in health systems and access to healthcare. So Damilola, I'll turn it over to you to share her connection to the issue and what she's doing now.
Thank you very much, Tess, and welcome everyone to this beautiful meeting. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to start by shedding some light on the video we saw at the beginning of the program. So the video was put together as part of knowledge translation tools by the Health Equity Action Lab at the Western University. And what we really hoped to do was to bring forward the challenges and barriers faced by refugees, immigrants, or refugee persons around credential recognition here in Canada. So our aim was to bring it out of the theoretical spaces and present it in a visual form so that it's easier to see and maybe empathize or relate with what they face. So having said that, I would just also briefly say that in Canada, a lot of focus is put on the tag Canadian education versus knowledge gained and education and credentials acquired from other places. And this is a tragedy because what it means is that refugees come into host countries and then face significant barriers, significant hurdles in resettlement economically. Having said that, I'll go on to talk about myself as an internationally trained doctor, what that means in Canada, and what I'm doing right now. Just to take us down in story form, I mean, think about it. As a child, I always dreamt of becoming a doctor, and it was easy. I grew up in a hospital environment. So the only thing I dreamt of was to become a doctor. And then I went ahead, pushed ahead to do this. And believe me, and any other doctor would tell you, regardless of country, regardless of location, medical education is no easy feat. Now, I moved into Canada in search of education. So you could call me, if you like, some form of economic migrant, but in this case, with a focus on education. Now, what does that mean as a doctor? I'm one of the lucky ones, really, if I think about it, temporarily, because I'm in a PhD program. I have funding for my academics, but that is not going to last forever. So, in as much as currently I have a bubble in which I am situated, this bubble will not last forever, such that I will be pushed into the experience of my colleagues out there. Now, simply to set a background into some of the things I will talk about tonight is the fact that currently in Canada, we have about 10 to 15% of slots open to internationally trained physicians to get into the basic level of training, which is a residency program. So before you set your best foot forward, you're already faced by hurdles which make the playing field not equitably disposed to internationally trained physicians. And when we talk about that, particularly for women, you can imagine uh, factors such as loss of status. You come into a country, you're thinking things are going to get better for you, and all of a sudden, all of the years of hard work you've put into residency training in your home country, becoming a specialist, you're faced with having to struggle within the Canadian space. And even when you do struggle with all of your might, the limit or the bar is set, because if only 10 to 15% of us are actually going to get work within the Canadian spaces, that tells you, or that tells us, that a lot of doctors are going to fall in the wayside. Now, for me, for example, with all the experience I bring to the fore from my work in Nigeria, in my home country, as a manager within the public health space, I had a beautiful career. I had status in terms of a little above the middle class. If I finish my PhD program and I want to say aim to become a medical officer of health, for example, even within the public health space, it is not readily open to me because, again, I would face the challenge of, oh, do you have a residency in Canada? Now, the question is, how do I get a residency in Canada when only 10 to 15% of doctors such as myself would ever access the space? So think about the consequences of factors such as credential devaluation and non-recognition of our credentials. And for a lot of my colleagues who have been in Canada for 5, 6 years, you would have stories of doctors who have had to resort to working as personal support workers simply to put bread to the table because they're unable to break through within the training space or even to get their credentials acknowledged to the point where their practice wisdom and all of the knowledge they bring to the table can be used within the Canadian space. So you have a lot of loss in status. Coupled with that, the whole process of credential recognition, doctors grapple with the sheer cost and the financial burden of having to go through all of these hoops before, for those of us who ever get lucky to break through, are able to get jobs or trainings or practice as doctors in Canada. Now, you could say, oh, but what were they thinking before they came to Canada? Canada is putting it out there. Come to Canada. All right. There's immigration open. You're dreaming, oh, I'm going to continue with my career. And then you get into Canada. You have specialists who have had to step down to take on jobs that are not at par with what their previous roles were. And all of this is a tragedy within the Canadian space because think about it, we don't have enough doctors in Canada currently. Against the backdrop of the pandemic, we need healthcare workers, and we have a pool of health professionals who are skilled, who are trained, who have had years of practice and training, but are constantly denied space within the Canadian medical front to even practice or bring to the table the knowledge they have and the skills they have. So within this context, a lot of women, particularly female medical doctors, have compromised careers. So you're in Canada, you have kids, you can't get a job, the bills are on you, and your colleagues at home are moving on. So again, you have to think about that comparative lens in which you're no longer at par with those colleagues who you started out in a beautiful career together, put in all of those years, but you come to Canada and what you have at the end of the day is, oh, I'm sorry, I'm unable to go forward in my training. I'm unable to practice as a specialist, or I now work as a care worker because my credentials are devalued, or there's just not enough space and enough room to accommodate um, internationally trained physician. So wrapping up, I would like us to think along the lines, and I'll pose these questions to you. Is the practice in terms of policy really equitable for international trained physicians? And how can we, in our capacities across board, make things easier for doctors who come into um, Canada with accredited, are able to prove their credentials to get spaces within the medical health system in Canada for practice? Thank you very much. Tess, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Damilala. It's really incredible to hear about your experience and what you're able to share about your colleagues and the important work that you're doing. We'll move on to our next speaker, who is Zarghuna Wakil. She's an international medical doctor specialized in internal medicine, and she has a Master of Public Health from Simon Fraser University. She has experience in healthcare and is currently a senior manager in specialized and innovative programs at Mosaic, BC, where she oversees a large cluster of programs that serve diverse communities. Zarghuna participates and chairs many health partnerships, and she is involved in advocacy for innovation in healthcare services to improve the quality and equity in the healthcare system. Sarguna, your turn.
Thank you, Tess. Hi, everyone. As Demolola mentioned, it's unfortunate that the Canadian healthcare system does not utilize the international medical doctors' professional experience and skills that they bring to Canada, and deny their contributions to to enrich the medical and healthcare system in Canada and ensure equitable access to healthcare for Canadians. I would shed a light on the systemic barriers that the healthcare professionals or medical doctors that are trained internationally face when they come to Canada through my own personal story as an internationally trained medical doctor and as a government-assisted refugee to Canada. I just want to make first a bit clear what's the difference between a refugee and an immigrant. Refugees are people that are not choosing to leave their home country, they are forced to leave. And immigrants are people that are planning to leave to look for better options or to better their life. So as a refugee, it was not my choice to leave my home country. I love my home country, but I was forced to leave it. Back home, I was faced with challenges to even get basic education because the political situation in my country changed in a flip of a moment, and then girls were denied school and women were denied work. So that was one of the types of discrimination I faced. My family left and we became refugees in another country. I did my medical education in other country, and the language I did in medical education was Russian. I graduated from medical school while being a refugee as a top student, and I was even given a gold medal. So then I entered the residency to become a cardiologist. And while I was doing my residency, I was really appreciated by patients that I was involved with in the hospital, as well as my supervisors. And I was like feeling really good about my skills, my experience, and that although I was a refugee and denied education in my home country, but I was making really good progress. And so basically during this time, I had this interview because there was an option of resettling to Canada as a refugee. And when I had my interview with the immigration officer informed me that there is the possibility that your credentials may not be recognized in Canada as a doctor, or you will not be given a license. And when that was like something new to me, because I thought I was so knowledgeable and so good in what I'm doing. So I asked why. And the answer was, oh, because it's really difficult to become a doctor in Canada. But then I thought, was it easy for me to become a doctor? It was not. And is it easy in my home country to become a doctor? No. Only the top students can enter medical school. And in the country that I was getting the education was not easy to become a doctor either. So, and I'm a person who does not take no for an answer. I was like, okay, I'll go to Canada and explore. And again, moving to Canada was not again an option because, not a best choice, because if I stayed in the country that I was living in, I would not be given the same chances as local doctors because I was a foreigner. And foreign doctors will not allow to have a job as a doctor in that country. So I had to move to Canada. I had to choose between being discriminated against as based on my status of being a refugee, or being discriminated against as a professional in Canada. I moved to Canada. I did not speak English when I entered Canada. While I was learning the language, obviously, if you don't speak the language, you don't have firsthand information. I learned that we can pass evaluation exams, and then compete for residency. I was learning English. to learn English, I went back to school and I graduated from grade 12 in about 2 years. And I was able to communicate by then. And I learned that, obviously, I gathered all the books and tried to do my credential evaluations through the world education system. And by the time that I was able to access the information firsthand, I learned that even if I pass my exams as with high numbers, with high scores, and compete for residency, I will not be allowed to choose a profession that I really like to be. I would have to choose between a few of the listed professions in medical field, not the same as Canadian graduates. And then if I compete for residency and I get into residency, which is not, again, easy, but okay, you can compete. And then you will have to have this notion, it's called service back, which is you go for a remote area to work in that remote area for 2 years because you were allowed to do residency. And then again, you are treated as a second-class doctor. Did I want to be a second-class doctor? That was not something I would want to go for. Therefore, I chose my direction to change. And I went for Masters of Public Health program. And at the beginning of the immigration process, there were doctors who would go for jobs like being the care aid attendants. And that really impacted their mental health. And I didn't want to be part of that. So I started working in social work. And I was, at the beginning, I was doing the cross-cultural facilitation in the healthcare setting to help the newcomers get access to healthcare system and navigate the healthcare system. And then I started working with Mosaic, again, working with newcomers and ethnocultural communities. And in this work, I see the difficulties that the newcomer and ethnocultural communities face to access healthcare system. And there are not only linguistic barriers, but also cultural barriers. So allowing the international medical doctors to practice in Canada will diversify the healthcare system in terms of the workforce. And that will enable the system to provide the equitable access, equitable healthcare for ethnocultural communities. But that's denied. I would also argue that Canadian population is increasingly becoming diverse. And we cannot deny the fact that Canadian economy depends on immigration. And so if the statistics are reviewed, the Canadian population, the demographics are changing every 10 years. And it says that by year 2034, the 1/3 of the population will be ethnocultural communities. And diversifying healthcare forces is something that we should be looking into. So having said that, we can contribute to the Canadian healthcare system as international medical doctors, or as Demalola and I did, to change directions and becoming working in the healthcare sector in a different capacity, and work in terms of system change and contribute back to the Canadian society. But obviously, it would have been much better for the economy and for the healthcare system if our skills as medical doctors in the medical field will be utilized. Thank you. Tess, back to you.
Thanks, Sarguna. It's incredible to hear the journey that you had and all the things that you were able to overcome and all the contributions that you're making here, even if it wasn't your first choice of your profession. but what a loss for our system. We're coming into our second poll, building off of what Zarguna shared. And so the question is, did you know that there was such a difference in the way international medical graduates are treated in comparison with graduates from Canadian medical schools? And the options are, yes, I've been affected by this issue. I knew there was, second choice is I knew there was a difference, but not to this extent. And the third option is no, I didn't know anything about this issue. So I'll give everyone you'll have a minute or so to choose your answer and then submit. All right, and the results should come up. All right, so the majority answer is that many folks knew that there was a difference, but not to this extent. Well, I think it's great that everyone's here tonight learning more about how people have how some of our panelists have been affected, and we're going to shift gears in a moment just to learn more about some of the things that are being done to tackle this issue. And so on that note, we will switch gears and I'll introduce our next speaker, who's Rosemary Polyuk, and she'll be speaking tonight about her role in advising on the BC Human Rights Complaint. So Rosemary's a president of SOCASMA, which is a national organization which supports and provides information to international medical graduates, and which filed a legal action in the BC Supreme Court to address the systemic discrimination against IMGs. Rosemary's dedicated to bringing down the barriers to licensing in Canada for international medical graduates through her research team and legal expertise in support of the BC human rights case. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you. Many here today have been disappointed that Canada's reality does not live up to its reputation when it comes to freedom and opportunity. But Canada is a work in progress, and we all need to stand on guard. The truth is that we have a strong court system, and if we're prepared to fight for what's right, justice will prevail. When I graduated from law school 40 years ago, it was very much a man's profession. And for those of us who aspired to be trial lawyers, we had there was really no welcome committee. In fact, in my first trial, which I was junioring, we had barely gotten started when the judge interrupted, asking the lead counsel to send his secretary to the library to fetch a case. And even though lead counsel explained that I was not a secretary and that copies of the case were in the brief that the judge had, the judge directed us 4 times that the secretary be sent to the library because he preferred case books to photocopies. So 4 times I had to leave the courtroom to go and get the judge a book, which he didn't really need. What he really preferred was for me not to get out of his courtroom where he felt I did not belong. Now, today, women are very, very ordinary in the courtroom, but this change did not come free. It was a fight fought by many who saw the injustice. Unfortunately, the medical profession continues to be based on discrimination, and international medical graduates are treated as second-class citizens. And the current system of access to medicine is oppressive. In my opinion, it's immoral, and it's also illegal. Now, when I'm going to speak tonight, I'm going to use the word IMG just because it's shorter. And by IMG, I mean international medical graduates, doctors who graduated from international schools. There are literally thousands of IMGs in Canada who've proven their credentials, met the Canadian standard, but have been unfairly tossed aside because of systemic discrimination that rejects IMGs worse than the way women were rejected when I was growing up. Let me explain the system of exclusion to you. So the first discrimination point, there is a double standard. Graduates of international schools must pass 2 Medical Council of Canada exams to demonstrate that they have the knowledge and clinical skills expected of a graduate of a Canadian medical school to be eligible to apply. So you need to pass these exams to apply for entry-level jobs to medicine. In other words, to work as a resident physician. By contrast, graduates of Canadian medical schools do not have to take the Medical Council of Canada clinical exam, but they do have to take the knowledge exam, the qualifying exam. But if they fail that knowledge exam, they are still allowed to work as resident physicians. So IMGs must realistically excel in exams, Canadian exams, to even get an interview. And graduates of Canadian and American schools are free to work as resident physicians, even if they fail the Medical Council of Canada knowledge exam. Discrimination point number 2, IMGs are denied the right to compete for jobs for which they are qualified. You need to have one of these entry-level jobs working as a resident physician before you can be licensed. So if you don't work as a resident physician, if you come from all but 9 countries, you cannot be licensed. So despite being fully qualified in Canada, having your credentials recognized, IMGs are prohibited from applying for 90% of these entry-level jobs in Canada. In British Columbia, it's 85%. By contrast, there are more entry-level jobs for graduates of Canadian and American schools than there are applicants. As a result, in 2020, 25 graduates of Canadian schools did not get a residency job. More than 1,400 IMGs did not. That certainly has some relationship to the fact that IMGs cannot compete for jobs that they are qualified to compete for. Discrimination point number 3, IMGs are restricted in the fields in which they can practice. So for instance, in BC offers entry-level jobs in 29 fields. Graduates of Canadian and American medical schools can compete for all 29. All 29 are available to them. By contrast, IMGs are restricted to 4 out of 29 disciplines. And out of those positions, 90% are in family medicine, and only 6 positions in all of British Columbia are in specialties. In BC, IMGs are denied the opportunity to take subspecialization training. They cannot subspecialize. So there are currently more than 70 fields of specialization and subspecialization open to graduates of Canadian and American schools. Of those, more than 70 types of disciplines, only 4 are accessible to IMGs in British Columbia. And it may not surprise anybody that the fields that are open are on average lower paying fields in medicine. Discrimination point number 4, IMGs can only get these entry-level jobs, these residency positions, if they sign onerous contracts agreeing to work where they are directed. So graduates of Canadian schools who have been subsidized to the tune of $300,000 per graduate by taxpayers have no obligation to do any return of service. IMGs who've paid their own education can buy their way out of these contracts, which they signed because they had no choice but to sign them. Otherwise, the choice really is sign this contract or forfeit your career. You will not be licensed. But as I said, you can buy your way out. So if you can't be away from your family, your friends, or your commitments, or your religious congregation, and here is the price that the government puts on IMGs to buy their way out. The cost imposed for a 2-year job in family medicine, $480,000. For a 4-year job in internal medicine, $835,000. For a 4-year job in pediatrics, $796,000. For a 5-year job in psychiatry, $897,000. That's the cost of buying your way out of the return of service contract that you must sign if you're an IMG in British Columbia to work as a resident physician. This structure of exclusion of members of Canadian society, whether they're immigrants or Canadians who studied abroad or refugees, contravenes the human rights laws. It contravenes charter rights, the Health Professions Act, international covenants and treaties to which Canada is a signatory. The Human Rights Code reflects Canadian values, and the code states the following. The purpose is to foster a society in British Columbia in which there are no impediments to full and free participation in the economic, social, political, and cultural life of British Columbia, to promote a climate of understanding and mutual respect where all are equal in dignity and rights, and to prevent discrimination. The law is clear that access to a profession and rules and policies at all levels of access must, first of all, be open to all sectors of society without discrimination, unless there is specific legislation which authorizes discrimination. There is no such legislation. Secondly, the law is clear that to have admission and registration criteria in any the access to a profession must have admission and registration criteria designed for the purpose of determining competence to ensure public safety and for no other purpose. Competence and only competence, that is the law. The other law is once international graduates establish substantial equivalence, they should be treated and placed on an equal footing with local graduates. There are all kinds of rationalizations for segregation and unequal access to the medical profession, but stripped to their core, the system of access to residency training is intended to, first of all, privilege one group at the expense of another, and secondly, to create a subordinate workforce which has no choice but to work in underserviced disciplines and underserviced regions. Fear and access to legal proceedings have kept this system, which oppresses refugee and immigrant physicians, from being challenged in court. But the time has come, and this system, which has excluded IMGs, is before the Health Professions Board currently. It's before the Supreme Court of British Columbia. And as of June of this year, 5 immigrant physicians have filed a human rights complaint. Privileging graduates of Canadian and American medical schools over IMGs is part of the psyche of the culture of medical profession because it's been going on for a long time. It's not much different than the institutionalized privileging of whites over blacks, the vestiges of which remain today. Legal action is necessary, awareness is necessary, discussion is necessary. Representation is necessary. IMGs do not have a voice on the boards which make decisions that affect them. Without a voice, there can never be introspective consideration of equality on the part of the people who were involved in the system. These are not bad people. It's just the way they were raised. There needs to be representation on these boards so that immigrants and refugees can be heard and the harm can stop happening. Canada needs all of us to stand on guard and fight for a principled society, which has its people advance on the basis of individual ability, not on the basis of having attended the right school. I encourage you to contact Canadian on Paper, Society of Immigrant Physicians for Equality, and join this movement. It's important. Silence and inactivity perpetuate the problem. So if anybody is interested, there's different ways that you can help. And one of them is by bringing awareness and I urge education of the system, because it's not really understood, not even by the people in the system, how it developed, how it works, why it's perpetuated. And I'd encourage you to have your organization join the Alliance to Fight Systemic Discrimination Against IMGs. And that name of that alliance is the Alliance of Doctors Denied by Degree. And I could provide contact information in the chat box shortly. I would ask that you support the human rights case, either by contributing financially or by offering your time. There are many jobs and there's much pressure and education and work to be done, and it has to be done in order for us to succeed. If you are part of an organization, consider joining the legal action as an intervener. And if anybody has any questions or is interested in that, you can contact me about that. So that's what I wanted to say. I will put on the chat the addresses where you can reach people to help. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's great to hear you speak, and your passion for the issues really comes through, and as well as your knowledge. And thanks also for sharing some of the different ways that participants and panelists that we can get involved in supporting the cause to end this discriminatory practice that's in violation of many of important laws in BC and Canada. Our next speaker is going to speak to the bigger picture about how international medical graduates could improve the Canadian healthcare system, and what are some of the potential challenges in the inclusion of more international medical graduates. So before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to just share a quote with some food for thought for everyone. So does the current health system need more competition to create better doctors, or is the need more doctors? If it's more doctors, who will pay for training and for increased services rendered? Do we use existing physicians well enough, or should we use them differently? So to answer some of these questions and some of the tensions within the system is Dr. Maureen Mayhew. She has had a diverse 30-year medical career that's taken her across Canada and into Africa and Asia. She was trained in family medicine at McGill, in public health at Johns Hopkins University, and in research methods at the University of British Columbia. She's also completed certification in professional coaching. She's spent 20 years working in refugee and immigrant health and has published on those topics. Her current interests as clinical professor at the School of Population and Public Health at University of British Columbia lie in using strength-based approaches to maximizing potentials. She's currently writing a memoir related to her work of over a decade in Afghanistan. Maureen, go ahead.
Thank you, Tess. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel like I might be the black sheep, though, because I'm a Canadian graduate. And so I graduated from McGill, and I went through residency program here in Canada. So the lens that I'm going to bring to what I'm going to say is of someone, a physician who's practiced for 33 years in a variety of settings in a whole bunch of different health systems in Canada, in different provinces and territories, as well as abroad in different countries. And also the lens of someone who has done some research on access to care and facilitating care of refugees and immigrants in Canada. And then the other lens I'm going to throw in there, I think at the end, is the lens of a physician who works for the physician health program here in British Columbia. So, I see many benefits to the Canadian healthcare system in terms of what IMGs would bring. And I'm going to use the IMG term, it's just easier. And the first one that I think of is language. We know that everyone does better if they can receive healthcare in their first language or their mother tongue. And there's lots of studies out there that indicate that. And what I would imagine is that IMGs, certainly people who come from other countries, there are certainly some IMGs who are Canadian who go external and then come back. So those people I'm not so much talking about, but the people who come from international settings, who learn their trade in the international setting and then come to Canada, oftentimes bring extra languages. And those languages are beneficial, as Zarghuna mentioned, because in particular, refugees and newcomers don't speak English or French all that well in many cases, not all cases. And so they can benefit more from healthcare if it's delivered in their primary language. You might wonder, well, what about using interpreters? And what we know about, I've worked with interpreters for, forget how many years, but say 15 plus years. And interpreters, working with interpreters is tricky. There's a third party in the room. And so there's a confidentiality thing that you have to consider. And the other thing is that it takes an awful lot longer. It takes about twice as long to see a patient as a physician if I'm using an interpreter, because everything has to be said twice. And then the third thing is that it's an expensive service that has to be paid by someone. And then the question would be who would pay those services? Is it the patient? Is it the physician? Is it the healthcare system? And there's all sorts of comments we could go into about who pays, and then that's not really the focus here. The second benefit that I see is a diversity in culture and health beliefs and practices. And what we know is that medicine is an art and a science, and we like to think of it as a science, but there's certainly artistic ways of implementing that science, if you will. In different cultures have their own beliefs on the origin and the meaning of diagnoses, and also on the values of treatment. And with IMGs, we might be able to bridge some of the differences a little bit better, because some of the IMGs may share in some of that diversity in health beliefs and practices. And a third advantage is a diversity of approach. And what I mean by that is that international graduates who've been trained elsewhere and have worked in different health systems bring their knowledge of those systems to the Canadian system. And the Canadian system is far from perfect, and we all know that. And so what we can do is to use the sort of idea of new eyes. Like, we know when we see something for the first time, we see opportunity that we may not see if we've been looking at that same thing for a long time. And so that diversity in perspective could lead to a strengthening of the Canadian healthcare system. And that could result in, as I mentioned before, ways of diagnosing or treating patients. But other elements are things like research, the foci of research. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a Chinese international medical graduate who had decided to do a master's in public health, and we were working on in the BC Center for Disease Control in tuberculosis, and we wanted to look at latent tuberculosis. So that's when you have the precursor of the disease, but you're not infectious and you're not sick. And there's certain things we can offer people. And when we broached that topic of why the Chinese group was not, it was Chinese and a few other groups were not interested. It was particularly the Chinese group that had no word for latent TB. For them, it was tuberculosis and I'm sick and contagious, or I don't have it. And so the translation of that was very, it was very interesting for us. And it was also very helpful for moving that issue forward and trying to understand it better. So that's just an advantage of one of the ways that research might be shifting if we had more international medical graduates and the perspectives from those different areas. And then, of course, another thing that could change is also teaching. Again, medical school is hard. We've heard it's hard everywhere, right? And so are there different ways of teaching that would be beneficial? And then a fourth advantage is the navigation of that complex beast we call the Canadian healthcare system. The Canadian healthcare system is a public system, which is quite different from many other places which are used to private systems. And in a private system, you basically can go and pay for the services that you want when you want them. I mean, there's all sorts of models of healthcare systems in the world, and I won't go into any of that. But just to highlight the idea that two polar opposites are the Canadian public system, where you have to have a family doctor, and then that family doctor will help you move through different options for diagnosis and treatment, where in comparison, there's a private system where you just go to whoever you want and you pay them. And lots of newcomers find that the Canadian public system is bureaucratic, time-consuming, and confusing. And so navigating that system, certainly with newcomers, has been quite difficult, and it's a challenge for lots of healthcare workers to try and help them navigate that. And what I was thinking was that IMGs, having newly maybe been introduced to the Canadian system, become quite adept at being able to convey that the issues that are commonly faced by newcomers. And you know, certainly it takes time to transition from one kind of health system to the Canadian public system. And that's part of the reason why residencies can be really helpful, is to make that transition, because the systems are different. So the other thing, what I also wanted to highlight was that we don't have all the answers to this. And what is important to me is that we create win-win situations as opposed to win-lose situations. And right now, the current system is obviously, the losers are the IMGs, and the winners are more the Canadian graduates. And that's not fair. And we've heard Rosemary talk about the unfairness of that. But if we were to open up the residency spots to all the IMGs in Canada, and we don't increase the number of spots, we just increase the competition, is that going to benefit us in the way that we envision? And I would argue not. I would argue that that trainees in medicine are already stressed. They already have quite high levels of depression, anxiety. This is where I put my physician health, or my physician health hat on. So they already have high levels of anxiety, depression, and even suicide. And so, you know, the increasing the competition for a limited number of positions is likely going to worsen that. Is that what we want? Is that going to create the best doctors in the system, or are there other ways that would help create this a more equitable system? And so, you know, one of the obvious ways that I would next think of is, well, let's increase the number of residency positions. That would answer it, right? Then we can have more doctors. And I guess what then comes up in my thinking is that that we have this public system, right, that has finite numbers of positions and finite numbers, a finite cost that they're willing to pay. And so would we end up training too many doctors? Would we end up having unemployed physicians in the system? I don't know, but that's something that I would ask as a question. And so I'll just finish up with, you know, the people have mentioned that there are there's a need for more doctors, and what the governments have in Canada have done is to increase to create new cadres. So they've got nurse practitioners and they've got physician's assistants now. And how does that play into the mix? And my very last point is, if we open up the system, do we cause a brain drain of doctors from other countries? And I would, you know, I argue that we don't want to do that either. So those are just a few thoughts. Thanks. Tessa?
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought for our panel discussion that's coming up. Thank you. Before we get to that, we do have one more poll for folks tuning in tonight. So I think that will pop up just now. And the question is, do you think it could be fair or just in any circumstances to deny qualified doctors the opportunity to practice equally in Canada? There's a few different choices. No, it's no, it's contrary to Canadian values. We should address the issues gradually, only if there's a better candidate for the job. And the last option is, I don't see any reason to change the system. So folks can go ahead and make their selection and submit. All right, and soon our results should be coming up. And so we have a pretty overwhelming amount that's saying the system does need to change. Some folks are thinking that it might be something to address gradually, and the overwhelming majority have answered that they believe it's contrary to Canadian values. So without further ado, I'm going to open up the floor for all our panelists, and we've had quite a few questions that have come in through either the chat or the Q&A. So I'll do my best to get through them, because there's some really great questions, and I think all our panelists will soon be turning on their videos. Perfect. And so the first question that we have is for Damilola. It's for you, and the question is, and maybe hopefully this is something that you can speak to, is how do the systemic barriers facing international medical graduates affect their mental health. We heard Maureen speak a little bit about that with Canadian medical graduates, so perhaps you can shed some light for international medical graduates.
Thank you very much, Tess. And I think, like you said, Maureen did touch on that a little bit. She said she was putting on her hat as a physician, but bringing it to conversations with colleagues and conversations I'm beginning to have with myself as I look at the end of my PhD program. You have the sheer burden of the cost of examinations. You have the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty. Bear in mind that a lot of these doctors come in with their family, they have children, and they have bills in Canada. So there's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of a sense of, excuse me, almost helplessness that comes with having to take on lower paying jobs. I mean, I gave an example of, or I touched on a colleague who is a psychiatrist who came into Canada and currently works as a personal support worker because that's the only thing he can, have. So just think about the sheer pressure and the torment and torture. And then you have a situation where you begin to ask yourself, how am I better off by coming into Canada? Because the whole economics of it and the whole loss of status, and as you well know, doctors belong to a particular cadre within the society. So you go from hero to almost zero in your quest to come into Canada. So there's significant mental health stress, mental health pressure. There's been conversations around suicide, for people who have been in the system for 4 or 5 years, and there's just no headway. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamilola, for sharing that.
Before we move to the next question, Tess, I'd just like to share some information from working with people who have IMGs who've encountered this system. And there's no doubt that Maureen's correct in that depression, stress, even suicide, that certainly is true of Canadians who are, concerned about getting a job. Now, I would just put that in context. Canadian graduates of Canadian schools feel depression, stress, suicide, where they have more than one position per applicant. Now, put that in the context of physicians, immigrant physicians who've got families, who've now got children going to school and who are taught about Canadian values. And those children come home and they say, Dad is saying, I'm a good doctor. I'm really a good doctor. Mom is, and the kid says, I know better than that. I know everybody's equal. Everybody's judged on their individual. So then, there are broken homes. There is depression. There is suicide. I would venture substantially more suicide, substantially more mental illness in the immigrant and refugee population, simply because of the tremendous difference in opportunity. And I'd just like to use an example of the law profession. At one particular, I remember there were a couple of years where it was very difficult to get an articling position. You don't get an articling position, you don't get to be licensed as a lawyer. And one year, something like 40% of UBC graduates did not get articling positions. But it was a matter of competition. And it was a matter if there weren't enough positions, and everybody had to deal with it. It wasn't like somebody was being oppressed and denied on the basis of their individual ability. And that's what this country is about. This country is about individual. And it it is not right that we should be concerned about we should be concerned, and Maureen's right, we need more residency positions, but depression and suicide and stress are multiple times greater in the immigrant physician community and refugee physician community because of the discrimination and oppression.
Thank you, Rosemary. So building off of that, there was a question that came in for Zarguna, and the question is that she had mentioned she didn't want to work as a second-class physician, and so we had someone joining us tonight who wondered if she could explain what she meant by that.
Thank you, Tess, and thank you for this question. I think Rosemary touched a lot about how internationally trained medical doctors are being treated in Canada. And that's not only by the system or by the regulatory bodies. The notion that was set about international medical doctors in the society is also creating this type of a belief that the internationally trained doctors are not as good as Canadian trained. And they don't have the requisite qualities or skills to practice. And that's unfortunate. I mean, the fact that international medical doctors, even after passing Canadian evaluation examinations, are not allowed to access the medical professions that are available for Canadian graduates is speaking that they are treated as being a second-class doctors. Or the fact that after getting into residency, the pay, the service back contract is also a different treatment for international medical doctors. Those are the different treatment of the international medical doctors is something that makes them the second-class doctors, and I don't want to be one. Thank you.
Sorry, Tess, can I quickly add on a sentence?
Of course.
You know, and when you use a simple sentence to describe all that Zaguna simply tried to explain, it's a constant sense, feeling, and after a while you begin to embody that feeling that you're not good enough. You're not good enough to speak. You're not good enough to think. And you're not worthy to be in this space. And you are told that through nuances, body language, and some outright people who look at you and say, "Excuse me." And that is the position that majority of internationally trained physicians have to constantly navigate. Thank you.
There's a question that's come in, and I'm not sure who, I'll open it up to anyone who would like to answer. But someone's asked, was it arbitrarily set that only 10% of international medical graduate, like the residency positions are open to international medical graduates? And why are there only certain specialties or the subspecialties that are open to IMGs?
I can give that a shot. There's no yes or no answer to that. You have to understand the context of the Canadian medical system. And in 1992, an economic report was brought out by Bear Stoddard, and it influenced training, the number of the amount of training and the philosophy of medical health care and physicians throughout North America. And in a nutshell, what that report stated is that if you control the number of physicians, you control access to health care and you control the budget. And so our system continues to embrace that philosophy. And although you will hear the government say, we really are trying to fight that shortage, you know, that yes, there's a physician shortage, or sometimes they'll say, no, there's no physician shortage, depending on what politics is being played at that particular moment. So the reason that we don't have more residency training is not because we don't need more doctors. It's because to figure out how many physicians we need, we look at the budget divided by the cost, average cost per physician, and that gives you the number of physicians that we need. So when we say 10% allocated to IMGs, that basically there's a lot of it's largely based on politics. And originally there were in a prior when the universities first made this rule that that Canadian and American graduates should be first in line for residency positions, and IMGs were only able to compete in the second iteration. An immigrant physician in Ontario sued. And as a result of that, to try and deal with that lawsuit, this two-stream system was created. And so basically, the 10% is across Canada, or 15% in British Columbia, is a function of what the ministries are willing to fund. And it's that simple. And why is it only 4 disciplines in British Columbia? Because the only ones being funded are the underserviced disciplines. 90% are family physicians, because we've got a huge family physician shortage. But it takes months and months and months to see a psychiatrist, but there are only 2 psychiatry positions funded. It's how much we're prepared to spend. The irony, however, is that we've done some research in respect to whether there could be other funding, other funders. And there are municipalities and large corporations who operate in rural areas who are prepared to fund residency positions. And yet the universities are unprepared to train. So we have SACASMA, the organization that I'm a president of, we have asked whether we can fund residency positions, but get private funders. And the answer is absolutely not. So it's a very complex system. And the reality is that IMGs are on a if, when, and as needed basis. We don't have IMGs certainly do not have full rights as Canadians. Do not.
Thanks, Rosemary, for enlightening us.
Can I just add one point to what Rosemary said? I think certainly there's another component to ministries of health, and they pay for the health care delivery after the residents have finished, right? So if you've got more physicians giving more service, it's going to cost you more, and it's a public system, so therefore the taxpayers have to be willing to fork over that, or so that would mean an increase in the tax base, or it could mean that you take money from somewhere else and put it in there. So I'm just sort of highlighting the complexity of the system. It's not just the residency positions, it's also after the residency positions as well. And then just one other point is that you know, the entry point to becoming a doctor in Canada is, you know, I know Rosemary and I sort of disagree a bit about the dates, but used to be that, and still is, the entry into medical school. That's where all the culling happens. And so you've got a large portion of applicants who don't make it into medical school. and then you have a very small portion of medical students who don't make it into residency. So the culling is at the entry of medical school. And why do I mention that? It's just to highlight, I think, a bit about how the system works. I'm not arguing that it's a great system. I'm just saying that that's how the system works. And you know, I also think it's really important to think about, why are we training all these physicians, both internationally and in Canada, and then not having physicians out of them? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So again, back to this idea of competition, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think that it doesn't answer the questions that we want answered.
I would like to respond to that. In terms of culling at medical school, all other professions, many professions have postgraduate training requirements. And in every other profession, it's a matter of competition, because that's kind of the hallmark of a free and democratic society, that if there aren't enough positions, then you have a competition for them. And just because somebody has finished law school or medical school and can't be licensed because they couldn't get a residency or articling position, doesn't mean that their education has been wasted. There are other things that people with those degrees can do. And to say that medical school is the appropriate place to decide who's going to be the doctors of tomorrow, the counter argument to what Maureen says is, and I put it in an analogy, you have to remember that before medical school, you're looking at people who've got various characteristics, but they haven't even taken their first medical school class. They haven't taken their first medical school class. And the reality is that some people flourish in medical school, and some are what some doctors call non-bloomers. And the current system has the non-bloomers advance, while immigrant physicians who are super bloomers cannot. And that's not good for the public system. And so when you say, to use a baseball analogy, saying that the doctors of tomorrow, we're picking our pro team before they've even been on a ball diamond, before they've thrown their first pitch, been coached for their first pitch, before they've hit their first ball. That's not how you pick a pro team. You pick a pro team at the very last minute when you've seen all their skills. And so I don't think that the other aspect of course, is the law, which I always go back to. And the law is that regulation, licensing, as a matter of fact, the law is that there are strict regulations in respect to licensing in the regulatory field, because competence is supposed to be a determining factor. And what has happened in this instance is that the regulation has moved the culling out one stage down. And that's what the lawsuit before the Supreme Court and the Health Professions Review Board is, that this is illegal. You can't do indirectly or one stage down what you couldn't do in the open. So that's what those two lawsuits are about. That's my response.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rosemary. I'm cognizant of our time tonight, and we just have a couple minutes left. And you know, there's a lot of great questions that we weren't able to get to, and we will be able to save those. So you know, if there's ways that we can continue this conversation after, I know that we'll look for those opportunities. I'd just like to give open the floor up to Zarghuna just to give us any final thoughts, ways that we can support moving towards a more equitable system for international medical graduates.
Thank you, Tess, and thank you for the opportunity today to present. As a last word, I would say that I will make a very controversial, or maybe I'll make a comment that may not be favored by many Canadian graduates, but I think the skills and the experience that is brought by the international medical doctors may be even more needed in Canada, because Canadian society is a multicultural society, and they bring that multiculturalism, and as Maureen mentioned, language abilities as well. Like, I speak 5 languages, and I was living in many countries, and I'm a multicultural person, and I have that medical experience and knowledge and skills. But if I pass my medical evaluation examinations, I should be given equal rights as Canadian medical graduates, because I proved that I have the knowledge. And the notion that's being said that the international medical doctors are not being licensed because they want, like the regulatory bodies want to set this public safety, as if international medical doctors are a threat to the public safety. But if I pass the exams, I should be given equal rights. And I'm going through the residency, which is like an opportunity for integration into the Canadian medical system. And it shouldn't be like, international medical doctors shouldn't be treated differently because they have the same knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have one more poll, and this for folks still with us, this will be a good chance for you to give us your contact information if you'd like to continue to be involved or support these initiatives in some of the ways that Rosemary mentioned earlier. So we have the question is, would you like to support the campaign for equality for international medical graduates? And you can answer yes, maybe, or no. And if your answer is yes or maybe, you can leave your email address in the chat or the Q&A boxes, and someone will be able to get in touch with you to look for ways that we can engage with you on this really important issue. So over 90% of people are wanting to get involved, so that's great, and that's really encouraging. And so MAP and some of these other organizations will get in touch. So we're just a little bit past 8:30, and so I'll just wrap up quickly by thanking everyone thank you for the opportunity to moderate this panel tonight. I've learned a lot, and it's been a real pleasure. If you do want to find out more about the agencies serving the claimants, you can visit the MAP website. Also on the MAP website is more information about some of the campaigns that were spoken about tonight. I'd also like to thank Damilola, Zarghuna, Rosemary, and Maureen for their excellent presentations and for the engaging discussion that we were able to have, as well as MAP and all the event partners. There is an event another InFocus event that's happening in April 2021, and the topic is border control. So just to finally wrap up here, I'm going to hand the platform over to Jenny Lam. She's a co-chair of MAP, and she'll do some further closing words. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for Tess, your introduction. It has been a pleasure to have participated in this event, and this is the first MAP's new InFocus series. And MAP is a network of agencies serving refugee claimants all over the BC Lower Mainland, and part of our mandate is to speak out on issues that affect refugees and newcomers. Hence, we have this event. We invite the public to join with us in future events and raise topics that we should consider for public debates. And my fellow co-chair, Richard Belcham, and I would like to add our thanks to all the speakers, and especially to Tess for your moderating today's event. Thank you so much, Tess. And then we would also like to thank the Information Working Group who have put many, many volunteer hours into this project. So Angela, Michelle, Sevlin, and Thine. Well done, ladies. Without your help, we won't have such a wonderful event for tonight. And of course, I would also like to make use of this opportunity to thank another important person, Jenny Moss, like our MAP Executive Coordinator, who is the very important person behind the scenes for all our MAP meetings as well as events. Thank you so much for spending the night with us. And good night, everyone. See you soon.